Hello, my name is Austin, and this is Go Access, a YouTube channel dedicated to access in higher education and disability rights. Today I'm going to be covering career coaching for students on the autism spectrum. So I first wanted to talk about just in general people with a disability and people without a disability. And you can see from this chart that even people who have like a bachelor's degree, people with a disability are much less likely to have employment than people without a disability. So I think it's important to understand that there are some real employment challenges for people with disabilities and for people on the autism spectrum. So one of the big challenges is in the pre-employment, which involves the resume, the interview process, and social interactions needed to secure employment. Then you have the employment phase that involves navigating the job, having the social skills and executive functioning to learn the required tasks. The higher education institutions must work to add supports to their employment services or career services so that those students on the autism spectrum can access those services and have the interview training and resume building necessary to get jobs when they graduate. One thing to keep in mind is that there are services particularly targeted toward people on the autism spectrum and with other disabilities. This is called the Department of Rehabilitation from our government, and they have vendors and in-house supports called supported employment, where basically they'll help people find, with disabilities and on the autism spectrum, find jobs. They provide resume support, they provide job search help, interview coaching, and job coaching. The problem is a lot of this is geared more toward remedial jobs like stocking shelves and loading boxes, which is not what people who have a college degree want to do. And that's why sometimes their help kind of falls short. Although you can use them, like I use them, to do a mock interview and to get some resume help and building. So there are ways to get supports for college jobs as well, but it's important to keep in mind that their focus, if you're really going to a supported employment organization, particularly, is really at the remedial jobs because generally they have business contacts and contracts with those type of companies like Target looking for a stalker or something like that, and that's kind of the job they're looking to fit. They're not so focused on the education background of the person on the autism spectrum and what their interests are as far as their desires for career. So that's one area where it could be improved. In the higher education, one thing that really comes to mind is there's a lot of job fairs for students to meet employers. Students on the spectrum, again, have generally some sensory preferences as far as could be feel anxiety from the crowds, could feel overstimulated by like noise, the spatial closeness of all the students, and all the visual stimuli. So it's helpful sometimes to consider redesigning those job fairs. There's been more of a push for the employers to actually meet the students on the spectrum and to do a reverse job fair and to do that in a quiet environment where they're able to just kind of talk with a couple of interested employers who kind of understand the needs of the students and have some understanding or ability to provide some supports to help. There's also been more focus on just trying to either single out particular employers and set up meetings in a quiet place for a student on the spectrum to talk to the employer who appears to have some supports available to help the student. It's important to consider the career coaching aspect. A lot of students do not visit the college career coaching services until their senior year. People, students on the autism spectrum should be encouraged to start meeting with their career services as soon as possible when they're a freshman. They can work on really building their resume, doing mock interviews, so over time they can feel really prepared for all the social interactions and the interview process that entails trying to get a job basically and feeling comfortable with that process. Resume and interview coaching is a big aspect too. The student with the on the spectrum and the counselor can craft a resume that highlights the student's strengths. Students on the autism spectrum, as I said, could do the mock interviews, and you can just over time the student will feel more comfortable, have the knowledge and the coping strategies to be successful. Finding employers. The career counselor should really work to find employers interested in working with people on the autism spectrum. Many employers like Google, Microsoft, IBM are creating their own programs to help people on the spectrum transfer successfully into their job roles. That can involve, having meetings with other people on the autism spectrum, kind of sharing their questions or concerns regarding the job and making sure that it's more structured as they're transitioning. The career counselor should really discuss with the potential student, with the student, the potential challenges and develop a plan to help the student successfully assume their job role and kind of already be thinking about what are the challenges you might face when you're an employee at this type of company. So keeping that in mind. Things to consider. I think disclosure is a real personal decision and should be up to the student, not the career counselor. I believe that a student should not disclose in their resume or interview unless they will need noticeable accommodations. That's just my opinion. I think that if you don't have anything that you really require an accommodation for example, some people on the autism spectrum may not feel comfortable looking are at a employer during an interview. If that's the case and you're going to do something like turn away or not or need certain changes to the interview format or then you may want to mention some of those things in your resume. But otherwise, if you're able to go through the whole process and there's nothing noticeable, I would say it's probably better to do that because then the employer, unfortunately, because of the way our society is passing judgments and stuff, they're more likely to be open to working with you and not pass a negative judgment. The student can use vocational services along with the college's career services to help them transition to employment. And the counselor should really work with the student to develop a pitch for the student. So regardless of whether they need accommodations or not, making sure that they're having a successful pitch, making sure that they understand the roles and responsibilities of the job they're looking for, how they're going to meet those expectations, what accommodations would work best for them, making sure they're really having all that piece, all those different components there, and emphasizing the student's strengths as much as possible is really important. One last thing I want to talk about is particularly workers on the autism spectrum and what they might benefit from. So once they're on a job, you might be looking at a preferred structure and routine. So really having a set routine for the job could be something that might be beneficial. Having specific, interactions for social gathering and kind of getting feedback from the employee on the spectrum and from the employer on how they're dealing with the social interactions and whatever feedback they have so that they feel comfortable. The employer should be prepared for the worker to ask a lot of questions and may ask more questions than average, and that they should expect that, along with maybe needing some work modifications depending on what the social component is, what the sensory components are. There may be some modifications that may need to be considered. This could be like a sensory break, reduction of social interactions, increased structure. Really depends on the preferences of the employee. It is important to mention that as we develop as an online society and having the access to the internet creates more freelance opportunities for people on the autism spectrum, and the ability to really interact with people through email or chat, which are different ways of interacting where people might feel more comfortable interacting through a chat box than versus one-on-one talking and communication. So I think those are cool things that are kind of developing where people on the spectrum can take advantage. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you have a great day.